On the 7th of June 2021, a 911 call was made from a large family estate at Moselle Hunting Lodge by Alex Murdaugh. A police officer from the Colton County Sheriff's Office arrived about 15 minutes and found at the scene where 52 years old Maggie, Alex's wife, and 22 years old Paul Murdaugh, Alex's son, had been shot to death. They were outside the house on the property, near the dog kennels. So who would want to do this? Powerful people make enemies. When you ask a question like that, the list gets long quickly, and the crime was pretty brutal. The thing is, the Murdaughs had a lot of skeletons in their closet and had many enemies who wanted to harm them. Nestled deep in the heart of South Carolina in rural Lowcountry lies a small, unincorporated community called Islandton. It's made up of maybe 100 people. It's from the state capital of Columbia, and it's residing in a very remote place. It is home to the powerful, wealthy family, the Murdaugh family. The Murdaughs have wielded power over South Carolina's Low Country for over 100 years, ever since Randolph Murdaugh Sr. founded his law office in Hampton County in 1910. The firm eventually grew into a large, powerful practice continued by his son, Randolph Jr., and his grandson, Randolph III. From 1920 to 2006, all three men also successively held the post of solicitor, aka prosecutor, for South Carolina's 14th Circuit Court. Randolph IV and Alec, two of Randolph III's sons, followed in their father's footsteps and became lawyers working in the family-owned law firm Peters, Murdaugh, Parker, Eltzroth, and Dietrich, usually shortened to PM-Ped. In the autumn, the family would go hunting, and during the summers they would spend time on their 17-foot boat. Born in 1967, Alexander Murdaugh, known as Alec, followed in his family's footsteps and studied law at the University of South Carolina, where he met athlete-turned-sorority sister Margaret Maggie Branstetter. They married in 1993 and subsequently had two sons, Buster, born in 1996, and Paul, born in 1999. The family lived in opulence, dividing their time among a beach house, a couple of private islands, and a massive 772-acre estate known as Moselle. On July 8, 2015, 19-year-old Hampton student Stephen Smith phoned his mother to tell her he'd run out of gas. Later that night, he was found lying in the middle of the road miles away from his truck. He'd died of blunt force trauma. Stephen had a massive head wound. His face was covered in blood. His right shoulder was partially dislocated. It cuts and bruises on his right. But his clothing was untouched. His car was found 3 miles away. Weirdly enough, the gas cap was unscrewed and hanging off the side of the car. Authorities with the South Carolina Highway Patrol initially assumed Stephen was the victim of a hit-and-run after leaving his truck and walking to get gas, and closed the case accordingly, despite numerous observations by police that suggested Smith's death was a homicide. But police also later noted that the scene looked staged, and town gossip began to swirl that Smith, who was rumored to be dating Buster Murdaugh at the time, had been the victim of a hate crime, or that the Murdaugh brothers had a role in his death. In June 2021, while the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division, or SLED, was investigating the other murders related to the Murdaugh family, authorities reopened the investigation into Smith's death, issuing a statement implying they were somehow connected.
What's going on out there?
My housekeeper has fallen and her head is bleeding. I cannot get her up.
Okay, you said she's fallen. She's bleeding from the head?
Yes.
Okay. How old is she?
I'm not sure, 58 maybe.
On February 2nd, 2018, The Murdaugh's longtime housekeeper, Gloria Satterfield, suffered a severe head injury at the Moselle estate and died on February 26th of complications including a stroke. The cause of her death is unclear since the coroner was never notified and Satterfield's body was never autopsied. Authorities later paradoxically described her death as both natural and resulting from an accidental trip and fall. Alex Murdaugh and two other men, banker Chad Westendorf and fellow attorney Corey Fleming, then conspired to steal Satterfield's $4.3 million insurance policy by misleading Satterfield's sons and diverting all the funds to Alec himself through a phony business Alec created called Forge. Satterfield's sons filed a civil lawsuit against Alec and others, claiming they never received an insurance payout concerning their mother's death. According to the complaint, Alec's insurance company agreed to a partial settlement of the claims associated with Gloria Satterfield's death of $55,000 to her sons. But the sons claim that they never received their money. The Satterfield insurance scam was just one of a laundry list of instances where Alec embezzled and defrauded money from clients at his law firm, usually by settling their cases for large sums of money and then failing to tell them about it while he spent the client's settlement payout on himself. He repeated the same pattern with, among others, Hakeem Pinkney, a college football player who became quadriplegic following an auto accident. Pinkney died in 2011, and his family never saw the more than $75,000 payout. Satterfield's sons were ultimately able to recover more than $6.5 million from subsequent lawsuits. Meanwhile, authorities received permission to exhume Satterfield's body in June 2022 in order to continue the criminal investigation into her death. On the evening of Feb 24, 2014, 19-year-old Paul Murdaugh and a group of friends were returning to the Murdaugh estate by boat after a night of partying. According to nearly all witnesses present, Paul insisted on piloting the boat himself despite being extremely intoxicated. He was reportedly in a belligerent, angry state and refused to give up the wheel, driving erratically and too fast along one of the area's many twisting waterways. At some point during the early morning hours, Paul crashed the boat into Archer's Creek Bridge, ejecting multiple passengers from the boat, including 19-year-old Mallory Beach. It took a week for authorities to recover Beach's body. Despite the clear signs of intoxication, however, authorities failed to record his intoxication levels at the scene. At the hospital later that night, multiple witnesses confirmed that Paul was still drunk and uncooperative. They also observed that Alex Murdaugh arrived at the hospital and began to threaten and attempt to coerce witnesses there, encouraging them to stick to a version of events that cleared Paul of wrongdoing. Mallory Beach's death led to a flurry of lawsuits and a criminal investigation focusing on Paul Murdaugh. In 2019, Paul was charged with 3 criminal counts of felony boating under the influence. He eventually pleaded not guilty. Beach's family sued the entire Murdaugh family, more or less, for her wrongful death, alleging that Alex Murdaugh and his brother Randolph and Paul Murdaugh and his brother Buster had conspired to cover up the cause of her death. In June 2021, Paul Murdaugh was just days away from what would have been a costly and expensive trial for Beach's death. He would never make it to the court date. So back to June 2021 to the murders of Paul and Maggie Murdaugh. They were shot to death 30 to 60 minutes before they were found. Sometime between 9 and 9:30 that night, both were killed with different guns. Paul, a shotgun, Maggie, a rifle. One of those weapons was owned by the Murdaughs. There were also signs of forced entry to the property, and Maggie's phone was discovered the next day along a rural road. Alec claimed he was in hospital with his dad, who was dying at the time of the murders. On September 3, 2021, Murdaugh resigned from the family's law firm after the firm confronted him over his years of suspected embezzlement. The firm later sued him, and law enforcement opened its own criminal investigation into the alleged fraud. The following day, on September 4, 2021, Alec called 911 to report a strange roadside incident in which he claimed to have blown a tire. When a stranger stopped to help him, Alec reported, they shot him in the head instead. Though someone clearly shot and grazed Alec in the head, the circumstances sounded strange since his car was equipped with extended mobility tires, so it was highly unlikely that he would be changing a tire on the side of the road. Authorities said that when they arrived upon the scene, they found one of Alex Murdaugh's tires was sliced, not punctured. Soon, the police recovered the knife that had been used to puncture the tire of Alec's car and discovered it was owned by Alec himself. On September 14th, Alec gave up the real plot. He'd intended to have a friend shoot and kill him so that his surviving son, Buster, could receive Alec's $10 million life insurance payout. Authorities promptly arrested Murdaugh and his accomplice, Alec's alleged drug supplier and former client Curtis Smith, charging Smith with assisted suicide and both men with conspiracy to commit insurance fraud. Alec posted bond and checked himself into a drug rehab center, only to be arrested for felony fraud charges in the Satterfield case when he emerged. This time, his bail was denied and his assets were frozen. On October 13, 2021, Alex Murdaugh is revealed to be a person of interest in murders of his wife and son. A grand jury issued 5 indictments charging Alec with 27 counts of financial misconduct. On July 14, 2022, Alex Murdaugh was indicted for the murders of his wife and son. A law enforcement source said that on the night of the murders, Alec allegedly reached out to Maggie, asking her to meet him at the family's estate. According to the source, Alec told Maggie that his 81-year-old father was in failing health and that she needed to see him before he died. Maggie and Alec had hit a rough patch in their marriage. After 30 years, Maggie Murdaugh was estranged from her husband Alec, living at the family's beach house and reportedly looking into divorce. Alec was neck-deep in fraud schemes whose payouts were dwindling, facing a costly divorce and potentially steep legal fees for his son. He also claimed to be battling what he later described as a 20-year opioid addiction. Allegedly, Maggie initially declined to meet Alec at the family home, suggesting that they meet at the hospital instead. Ultimately, she consented to meet at the property, planning to follow Alec to the hospital in her own vehicle. On her way to the house, Maggie allegedly messaged a friend, saying that something about her husband's behavior felt fishy. According to testimonies from families and friends, Alex Murdaugh had an opioid addiction and spent $50,000 a week on drugs. Questions still remain regarding the deaths of Stephen Smith and Gloria Satterfield, along with the extent and full nature of Alex Murdaugh's long list of fraudulent activities. As for the murders of Paul and Maggie Murdaugh, Alec has been found guilty after a 6-week trial that culminated with the defendant unexpectedly taking the stand to plead his innocence. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before finding Murdaugh guilty of killing his 22-year-old son with 2 shotgun blasts and his 52-year-old wife with 4 or 5 rifle shots. A judge sentenced Alex Murdaugh to life in prison on Friday, March 4, 2023, condemning the once wealthy and influential Southern lawyer to spend the remainder of his life behind bars. The judge handed the harshest possible sentence he could: consecutive life sentences without parole. While his defense attorney has affirmed that they will appeal the sentencing, the future doesn't look too bright for Alex Murdaugh, the South Carolina lawyer who had fallen from grace.